Hello, Cliff Stanwyck Real Estate, and in today's episode of Selling Real Estate, we're exploring buyer's investigations. Hello, and welcome to my YouTube on probably the most critical, it's the most critical aspect of buying a home. It's your investigations and matters affecting the property that you're investigating. That is the most important part. It isn't the loan, it isn't the appraisal, it isn't really anything other than you getting seller disclosures and potentially and hopefully some reports are included, and evaluating those and reviewing those and taking a look at those and satisfying what I hope to provide is a checklist of what you need to understand and accept before you buy the house. So I'm going to just hop into my disclaimer real quick. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Real Estate Fixed Inc., who the speaker is employed by. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. And, we're going to do buyer's investigations. And it may seem overwhelming, but that's why I'm providing a checklist today. It's not overwhelming, but it is a lot to do. And the default time period in the contract is 17 days, right? And you'll hear this a lot. Oh, we're going to do our buyer's investigations in 10 days, or we're going to shorten that up. Well, when you're looking at the contract here, what are the buyer's investigations? They don't even get into it at all, okay? There's no, after acceptance or delivery or any of that stuff in there. It's just, hey, it's 17 days, right? So the problem first starts is the way this contract works is you're told to read the next 16 pages after you fill out the summary, and probably most of you aren't going down to or I should say paragraph 8. And paragraph 8 basically says that that on the investigation of properties, it says. Investigation of property. This agreement, as specified in paragraph 3L, subparagraph 3, contingent upon the buyer's acceptance of the condition on all other matters affecting the property. See paragraph 12. One of the things I truly do not like about this contract is the hop around. The old contract used to kind of go step by step. As you can see, we're just blowing by all the disclosures that you're going to get. Here we are, buyer's investigation of property and matters affecting property. Buyer shall, within the time period specified in 3L, which is 17, old contract you would see it, have the right at buyer's expense unless otherwise agreed to conduct inspections, investigation, tests, surveys, and other studies. Now, one of the things that I recommend is that you have a conversation with your real estate professional and say, these things are important to me and these things matter to me. And I want to have, a home inspection. I want to have, if there's a pool inspection, and go through the type of things that you're really going to want an inspection on. And I think it's really important, if you haven't seen what a general property inspection is, what those look like, because you're going to find out, and you're going to be pretty much told in the contract and the buyer investigation advisory that a general home inspection doesn't cover everything. It doesn't catch everything. There's still a lot of other work to be done. But what I'm trying to do here today is I'm trying to give you a checklist. I'm trying to take what I really believe can be overwhelming, and to make sure you have a plan, because you can, in certain cases, with a real estate professional, you can get some of these costs in the contract, and there are properties that you could have over $1,000 of additional costs, especially if there's a well or a septic, and there's a boundary survey that might be needed, because you don't know what. You're buying 3 acres, for example, and you don't know where the property corners are, and the property corners have been disclosed as not on the property, right? And the same thing, the septic system. Again, I'm not going to try to go down on too much of a rat hole, but you need to understand how septic systems work, and you need to understand the limitation of some of these inspections. But again, part of this process is that you can go into the blender pretty darn quick if you if you truly look at what the contract is trying to tell you to what it's giving you a recommendation of what to investigate. I guarantee you that after you watch this video, you're going to notice there's a lot of things that you probably didn't do when you bought your last house, and you really need to do it on this house. And why do you need to do it, right? Why do you need to spend all this money on inspections? Because for most of us, it's the biggest purchase we'll ever make in our lives. It's an asset. It's something we're going to hold on to long term. It's going to, most often than not, if you watch my other videos, homes have always appreciated. How much? It depends, but they've gone up. Anyone that bought a house 5 years ago is happy they own a house today. The other side of the coin is everybody that bought a house thought they paid too much. Okay? The paid too much really hurts when you have a bunch of surprises because you bought the house without working through a checklist and a process to really determine what was important to repair or address during the escrow or get a credit for during the escrow, right? So again, my thought process here is to go over these buyer's investigation, and it's telling you to get a general home inspection, and it's telling you to do an inspection for lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards. Well, those only should really be performed on homes that are older than January 1, 1978. And it's also telling you to do a pest inspection. Well, you may find out that your loan is going to require Section 1 pest repairs, and you may find out that you need to have that report done anyway. On other terms, like with a conventional loan, you may not want to have those done because you don't want to be faced with the cost, or you're willing to do that cost after the escrow. But again, a lot of these things are discussions that you have to pursue with your lender, discussions you need to talk to with people and say, is this a good idea, or is this a good path? Real estate agents, we do the best we can. We do have experience, we do have knowledge, but you shouldn't trust it as more than you would any sort of thing when there's money involved, right? So I'm just sharing with you that you're going to find out, even when you read in the contract, it basically talks about the pest inspection, and it talks about any other specific inspections and physical condition of the land and improvement. Well, what are those? Well, you don't know. It just says any other specific inspections of the physical condition of the land and the improvements. And then investigations of other matter affecting the property other than those that are specified as separate contingencies. Buyer investigations include, but are not limited to, an investigation of the availability and cost of general homeowners insurance, flood insurance, fire insurance. See Buyer's Investigation Advisory, car form BIA for more. So now you're just going down the rest of this contract, all right? And it talks about some other things in there, but it's basically, when it's all said and done, you got to do all these buyer's investigations. And so far, there's could be there should be a home inspection. You may do something in regards to the pest inspection. There might be these other inspections. And if you looked earlier in the contract, you got 17 days. And you probably think, you know what, no big deal. I can do them faster than 17 days. I should be able to do them in a week. And then you go change the contract because you just kind of assume that these other investigations or inspections weren't too important, and you didn't read the Buyer Investigation Advisory, even though we told you like 5 times in the contract that you read everything and all the associated documents and forms associated with the purchase agreement, right? So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is, this contract is, a lot of times, is to protect the sellers, to protect the agents, not so much on protecting the buyers. And all the problems that happen in real estate after the purchase are more often than not due to matters affecting the property, meaning you found a problem that you shouldn't have found because you should have found it before you finished the purchase. So we're going to go down here and I'm going to show you BIA, the Buyer Inspection Advisory. I think it's very clever that it's a document that you sign after you sign the offer. Right? So no more buyer's inspections. You get here, and it basically, I love this. I just want this to resonate with everyone. The RPA has 16 pages. The Residential Purchase Agreement has 16 pages. Buyer acknowledges receipt of and has read and understands every page and all the attachment that make up this agreement. So you go ahead and you sign that, and then a few pages later, you look at the BIA, and you're not sure if you did get everything you needed. And you're probably not sure, well, what is everything that could be needed, right? So again, let's just pop through this. Importance of property investigations. The physical condition of the land and improvements being purchased is not guaranteed by either seller or broker. You have the affirmative duty to exercise reasonable care to protect yourself, including discovery of the legal, practical, and technical implication of disclosed facts and the investigation and verification of information and facts that you know or that are within your diligent attention and observation. A general physical inspection typically does not cover all aspects of the property nor items affecting the property that are not physically located on the property. If the professionals recommend further investigations, including a recommendation by a pest control operator to inspect inaccessible areas of the property, you should contact qualified experts to conduct such additional investigations. So what does that mean? That's kind of like, the history of the agreement, right? So what happens is people put a lot of stuff in their garage and they put stuff up against the walls, and then the pest inspector comes in and they can't inspect anything underneath everything you put in your garage and what's behind the walls. And they recommend they come back for an additional inspection once you've moved everything, which means an additional fee. And again, anytime when you have an additional inspection, is this something that you should plan on, or is this something that is, within the realm of understanding here? So what I did is I took this form and this buyer's investigation advisory, and I went back at the contract and I went over all the things that they call out in the general condition of the property and its system and components, and the square footage and the boundaries and the wood destroying pests and the soil stability and the water and utilities and the environmental hazards and the earthquake and flooding and the fire hazard and other insurance and the building permit zoning, governmental requirements and address, rental property restrictions, security and safety, neighborhood area, subdivision conditions, and personal factors. And what I did is I basically deconstructed it and put it all into a checklist. And I also went back to the contract and pulled some information out of the contract in regards to seller disclosures. And what I've done is I've built this checklist, and here's what the checklist looks like. So here's the checklist. And I've referenced in the RPA the paragraph and the subsections, and the subparagraph and the subsection of the paragraph. So basically, what you will see when you get into contract, and you should get it within a specific time. And one of the things I want to share with everyone is that what ends up happening is you go into contract and you have 17 days. Well, what you don't understand is 7 days of that time is essentially the seller has that amount of time to get you over most of the disclosures. So that leaves you 10 days to do all your inspections. And again, that can be pretty daunting. And I also recommend, wouldn't you like to have the disclosures? So in case there was some issues brought up on the disclosures, you could point your inspectors towards that issue, right? So part of the problem is, you got 17 days, but in the contract, there could be over a week before you get any of the disclosures. So it leaves you 10 days. But what are you supposed to do with, the disclosure? So you get the seller transfer disclosure statement, okay? All right, that's one of the things that you're going to get. And what does that look like? Well, that looks like this form here, the seller transfer disclosure statement. It's 3 pages long. There's that one. Okay, you're going to get another thing known as a seller property questionnaire. This one really gets into the dirt. It'll talk about all of the stuff that you'll notice that it'll pull parts of the BIA in there. It'll talk about repairs and alterations. It'll talk about structural systems and appliances. It'll talk about disaster relief, insurance, and civil. This is probably the two most important documents are the TDS and the SPQ when it comes to doing the buyer investigations, because there's a lot of information on the boundaries, on the landscaping, if there's a pool, and the condominium and common interest developments and subdivisions, and title ownership and legal claim. And trust me, the form ends up being pretty much the whole thing that the forum's about is about essentially working through all the things that you're going to see on the disclosure. So as I mentioned before, you get a seller transfer disclosure statement, you get a natural hazard disclosure report that has a lot of information that are more typical about the property and the surrounding areas. You get the seller property questionnaire, which is a home run. If the property was built before January 1st, 1978, you'll get a federal lead-based paint disclosure. You'll also, through the SPQ, and will be more often than not, find out if the property is in a high or very high fire risk severity area, and then you'll get a couple more disclosures that are triggered by that. And then here's this thing where, again, it recommends a wood destroying pest and organism inspection and report. And then there's the catch-all of any other specific inspections of the physical condition of the land and of improvements, right? Or improvements, right? So basically, here we are. We're now into the sheet of this general property condition, right? So the first thing I want to share with you is that when we're into the notes of this thing, when we get into this thing, that I have kind of put up some notes. The general property inspection will inspect specific parts of the property, not all of them, but it'll do parts of them, right? So you're supposed. I will tell you, typically, the property inspection will look at the foundation, and the property inspection will look at the roof. But the issue here is, if they find any repairs, they're not going to give you a quote for those repairs. And to be frank, I would recommend that you hire a professional roofing company to come out and look at it, right? You will a lot of times know about the condition, age, and leaks through the disclosures and also from the roof inspection, and they'll also tell you a useful life, and they'll also be able to extend to you, if you're getting into the next 5 years, what a roof replacement might cost for what they can patch, right? Plumbing in general is something that you're going to get through disclosures for the SPQ if there was any plumbing issues or plumbing modifications. You're also going to, in the general home inspection, they're going to basically do a really good job covering off on that. And now we're getting into the heating and air conditioning company, parts of the thing. I will share with you from a personal experience and also as a real estate professional, you a lot of times they're not taking off panels and looking at the internals on these air conditioning systems. They're doing a visual inspection. They're looking for leaks. I recommend highly, because this is a big ticket item. It's $10,000 to $20,000 to do to get to the latest code for the SEER and the energy efficiency that you need to buy, or you're going to want to buy. You're going to want, if you're going to replace it, you're going to want to upgrade. And so I recommend heavily that when it comes to heating and air, the general property inspection is going to be a good, kind of like comfort that, hey, I found a problem, I didn't find a problem, but you really need to have an HVAC, heating, ventilation, AC company come out and do an additional inspection. They run between $100 and $200 typically. Don't hold me to that. It's just roughly what they are. A roof inspection, there are free sources, and there are places that make you pay. It could be $200 for that roof inspection report. I want to just make sure I kind of throw out the cost there. So here you are. You're probably going to pay anywhere between $350 and $1,000 for a home inspection. They're usually priced on price per square feet. And there I've just come up with another $300 or $400 worth of inspections, right? So now you're going to do, the home inspection more often than not takes a very adequate look at the electrical. It takes a very adequate look at the mechanical. It takes a very adequate look at all the doors and whether they lock, and windows, whether they open, if there's screens. It does a pretty good job with the mechanical and the security. Now we get down to the pool spas, cracks, leaks, operations. It's usually an additional charge from a home inspector to do a pool. I recommend, again, that you hire a real pool inspection company, usually someone that's working every day in and day out with pools, because there are ways that they can do with their tests to determine if there's a leak. And a lot of times the home inspectors are not going to determine if there's a leak for the pool part of their inspection. So again, I recommend a pool spa. If it's a pool, get a pool inspector. If it's a spa, call up one of the local spa companies and have it inspected and say, hey, I would like you to come out and do an inspection. I'm sure they'll do it. Now, there's this catch-all in this contract, or I should say in the BIA here, right? Then this thing that's called other structural and non-structural systems and components. That could be a host of things. That could be a solar water heater on the roof. That could, what I mean? It could be, that could be just some other systems there that they're talking about, right? The next part of this thing is fixtures, and fixtures are often a misunderstood thing. But again, your home inspector will probably cover off a lot on fixtures. That means they're going to test any chandeliers, anything attached to the wall. They're going to look at. So that part is pretty well covered off, okay? And now we get into the built-in appliances. The general property inspector, the home inspector, will do a good job with that. Now, we have in the BIA, it talks about any personal property included in sale. Well, property included in the sale is complicated because it's usually at little to no value. If it is included at a value, well, what is going to be your level of satisfaction that it's worth whatever you're paying for it? And again, a home inspector is not going to look at any personal property. And in general, the real estate agent has nothing to do with any of this to begin with, right? So another thing that's somewhat interesting is the energy efficiency of the property. And how are you going to investigate that? Well, that's pretty simple. It's not simple. It can be as complex as you want to make it. Energy efficiency of the property would be basically getting the utility bills as far as the heating and the air conditioning costs and the electricity costs, and then comparing it to what PG&E says is an efficient home. That would be one way to get there. Another thing that comes up now is a solar system and EV chargers. And there is a disclosure, and most of you never see it. It's called the solar disclosure. And it talks about not only the system and the size and the capacity of the system, but the warranty, if it's available and if it's owned or it's leased, and the cost. And again, the solar system is a very complex thing. And my recommendation is to get a separate solar inspection and a system review. You may again, part of the buyer's investigation is you have to realize that you need to think a little outside the box. You need to think about, hey, what happens if I make this house bigger? What happens if I add solar? What happens, do I have enough solar? What happens if I add some garages? Do I have the right size panel on the house and all that stuff? So at the end of the day, right, not only are you buying this house based on how it's presently configured, but you have to, take this checklist that I've given you and also just kind of take a look and say, you know what, I'm going to add a few more things to this list and say, air conditioning, how big is it? Can I air condition the garage? I mean, these are just ideas or whatever. If I don't have a pool heater, how am I going to heat the pool? Am I going to use solar? Am I going to use, some sort of, natural gas or propane? And what is that going to cost? All these things this is just a list of things that you have to go through, right? And solar is definitely a big ticket item, and you really need to understand the quality of the equipment, if the system's had any warranty issues or maintenance issues, how the productivity of the system is, right? There's a lot of stuff to do, but again, the contract has a form, so it's not really overwhelming. So the next part that we look at is we look at this stuff called the square footage, and basically the appraisal will answer a lot of questions. The square footage, the room dimensions, the lot size. They'll often go out and verify the public title stuff. What they won't do is they're not going to go out and walk the property corners and say, yeah, I verified that the lot is 1.2 acres. The other issue that you have is a lot of times, and this is still happening today, is you'll get an appraisal waiver because you have 20% down. They pull out their automated values and they say, hey, we don't need to do an appraisal. Well, guess what? Now what are you going to do to verify the house? Because a good listing agent's going to tell you what the sources of that information is, whether it's the assessor, whether it's from the builder, whether it's from the seller. But at the end of the day, you may want to walk through the house with rooms that really matter to you. Like if you need to put a pool table in somewhere, you probably need 14 by 18 feet to put a pool table in. So you need to measure the room and make sure that you can put your pool table in there if that's important, right? So another thing that again, the appraisal is not going to hit off of, and I've talked about this, is it's not going to necessarily go down the what is known as the age of improvements, but that means you've got to go back and look at the stuff that's been updated or remodeled in the TDS and the SPQ, right? So if you didn't notice anything, right, you are juggling a lot of sources of information. You're juggling the disclosure, the TDS and the SPQ, and any other disclosures that come over with it, like pest reports. You're bringing all those to your home inspection, and then you're basically going to go through the home inspection report. You're going to look at all those things, and you may have a roof inspection, you may have a pool inspection, and you may have an appraisal, and then you're going to start looking at all this information again to make sure it syncs up to what you've been told, right? And that, again, it becomes a very overwhelming process if you don't have the right the right stuff here. And I'm having a problem with my thing here, so let's get this cleaned up. Okay, we're back at it. I got the right form up here. So anyway, right, we're going through this thing. We've gone through the square footage and the age stuff, and I'm just going over the age of importance. You're going to be juggling all these documents and inspection stuff, right? So now you get into the property boundaries, right? And the property boundaries, they can be investigated with a CAR form called the SWPI, and there's a thing that calls out where you can ask the buyer or the seller to basically identify the property corners. Now, if there are property corners, that is something you normally have to determine. The bottom line is you will be surprised that fences are not the property lines. Yeah, they may be on a recently built development. They put the fences on there, but if you're dealing with older property and there's wetlands and there's easements, a lot of times I'm out on country property. It's like it's the third fence over there. So again, understanding the property boundaries is very important. If it's a property that there may be an additional dwelling unit and stuff like that, you very much may want to have the property corners marked or identified. and that's an additional cost, and it can run from anywhere from $350 and up to thousands of dollars if you need to do the property boundaries. So if you do have an issue where you're looking at property and there's property boundaries, you definitely want to get that cost to be paid by the seller if it's really critical for you to buy it and they can't identify it, right? The property, a person selling the property should be able to tell you what you're buying, right? And if they can't, I don't know if that's really your problem to determine, right? I think that's something that the seller should be tasked with. You know, what am I buying? I'm buying 1.2 acres. Where are the property corners? I don't know. Well, don't you think you should get a surveyor out here to sell it? So anyway, that's getting back to the property boundaries, right? So now we're basically going back to the, we've gone through that, and we're now looking at the wood destroying pests and the pest report, and then you'll notice that the soil stability and the existence of fill or compacted soil, expansive or contracting soil, susceptibility to slippage, settling, or movement. So that's on you. What is it? Well, basically, you hope your house isn't moving. So, you know, you can Google all these terms and you can look at what they mean by soil stability and the existence of fill or compacted soil. That could lead to some structural stuff. Again, I'm not giving advice here. I'm just sharing with you if the compacted soil wasn't compacted and you have a slab on it, that could be a problem. Expansive or contracting soil can be a problem. Susceptibility to slippage, settling, or movement. And again, a lot of times the home inspector is going to answer the question of adequacy of drainage. And they're probably going to bring up some stuff also. One of the things that's pretty key in the home inspection is that they will normally mention things to code. And, you know, code is another interesting part of real estate is code. Code is basically, it's a living code. So a house built in 1977, you can't go back and look at 1977 code, but any new house today has to be built to the current code. So when you buy a house in 1999 or 2013, and you say, well, I want to know what was done in 2013. Unlike most standard engineering practices, they don't keep a revision and change log. And so you really don't know what you're buying, but the home inspector will say, hey, this isn't the current code. And that can or cannot be an issue. It will be an issue because if you do any remodeling, you're going to have to bring it up to code, right? So again, this is part of the buyer's investigations. And this is the complexity that can soon be like your head's going to explode because there's all this stuff I've got to keep track of. And what does it mean? How does it impact the value? And that's what you're ultimately trying to do is you're trying to determine, you know, is this what I want? Do I see the value in this house? And is there anything impacting the value I see in this house? And is there anything I need to do in the future to make it what I want or to address any issues, and is that something I'm willing to do? So these buyer's investigations, they need to be done with a diligence and with reasonable care, probably more than anything you've ever done. Whatever your favorite thing is or whatever you're obsessed with, you need to be obsessed about doing buyer's investigations. And, you know, it is a big part of it. And any agent who doesn't worry about investigations, he's never worked hard enough to make the deal, to bring the issues to bear. Because trust me, it's a used home. There's issues to be found. And our job is to communicate through disclosing material facts if it's something that isn't disclosed. So you make an informed decision about buying a home. So this aspect of buyer's investigation, you should encourage your agent to be with you the entire time you're ever doing any investigations. And you should also bring them by and seek out their opinion. We may say, yeah, you need to get a professional in here to look. I don't think we should ever minimize anything, but I think we should definitely say, yeah, you need to bring in the cavalry on this one, right? So let's just get back to the screen share. So we've kind of gone through the soil. Now we get up to the water, utilities, well systems, components, and waste disposal. Well, for most of you, you're probably not going to be dealing with a well or a septic unless you come to Loomis. Loomis has quite a bit of wells, and almost everything is septic out here. There's not a lot of sewer treatment stuff. Yes, in some of the developments there is. Like, for example, there is in the Sunrise part of the subdivisions down there on the other side of Taylor Road. Yeah, there's sewer. In Cambridge, there is public water, but there's septic systems, right? And Placer Canyon, there is sewer and public water, right? And so again, it's all over the place. But one of the parts of buyer's investigation now are water and utilities, well systems, components, and waste disposal, right? So again, I put a little note on this thing. If public services are available, water and sewer, obtain utility bills. That'll tell you a lot about, what you need to know about those systems, right? And there should be some rules available as far as use restrictions and costs. If you need more water to do it, or if your water's limited, or what the situation is, what kind of a blackout code you're in with the public utilities. That should be put out there. Now we get into this stuff that you don't think about, but this really applies to a well. Water quality, adequacy, condition, performance of well systems and components. Well, that's where you really need to have a well test, and a well test is essentially two components. One of them is productivity, which is how much the well outputs, and then there's another one called potability. Now, also in a typical well test, they will include checking out the system. Okay, they'll check out the motor control relay. They usually will do a general inspection of any sort of tank, what they call the bladder tank, and again the switch, which is a pressure switch to turn on and off the well, and they can tell you what the pressures are reading and do that kind of stuff. Now, the second inspection that happens if you don't have a sewer is, and I should say a in and connected sewer, because there are some places where they basically have there's a septic tank or for the whole development, and then they pump it, but it's not connected to a sewer system. So there's another thing called a septic inspection, right? And there's a form for everything here in California, but it's the SWPI, and there's a septic inspection. And what you need to understand, again, in this inspection is that, let's see if I can find it, when the inspection for the, where is it? Here it is that a septic inspection should be performed inspecting the tank. Now, that's all it does. Consider having the lines inspected to the distribution box and leach field. I think this is something you can ask your real estate agent about, because again, if you're dealing with a older septic system, you should be aware that you may want to have the basically distribution line from the tank to what they call the distribution box inspected, and make sure there's not any issues with the sewer water or the gray water getting to the distribution box. From the distribution box, it goes into the leach lines, and there can be several leach lines, and sometimes they can get through the D box with a camera, and they can actually look at your leach lines. But it's usually, again, it starts becoming a very high cost. A septic inspection will run you anywhere between $500 to $1,000 for the tanks, and then you're looking at a camera service for the sewer lines that can run probably $100 to $200 an hour. And if you're doing a septic system, they could be out there a couple hours. Another thing that I want to share with you is, even if you have you're connected to sewer, one of the things that you really need to do is you need to do that sewer line inspection from the house to the sewer. You sit there and say, well, I really don't need to worry about that. The house isn't that old. Well, what ends up happening is tree roots grow into the sewer line, and then it can either, a lot of times there's clay pipe or there's plastic pipe. Anyway, the pipe can collapse, and you have a huge expense because the pipe is not working and it needs to be replaced. it's just a really, it's $100 to $200 inspection, but you really should do it because you really don't want to have your first year of being in the house with a pick digging up your sewer line to try to figure out where the leak is, or paying somebody to go through that exercise. So again, that's another inspection cost that if you had kind of reviewed this checklist that you would be asking the seller to provide. Like, hey, we want a sewer line inspection to the main in the street, performed by the seller, or paid for by the seller. Another thing is, again, you start looking at all these inspections. Do you really think you can get it done in 17 days? And you might be able to, but will you have the disclosures before the 10th day or before the 7th day, right? Because I think it's really important to have disclosures so that you don't lose the 7 days of inspection time because you're waiting for seller disclosures. And it's why, as a practice, I encourage all my houses that I list to do all these disclosures and reports, and also to do some of these inspections, so that we can just get everything moving and down the road and not have all what I call fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the FUD factor, right? So that's something that I encourage to do, and my sellers to do. And also, as a buyer, we need to get these inspections scheduled ASAP, because when the market is busy, sometimes you can't get it done in 17 days. So again, this inspection period, once you agree to it, you've agreed to it. And a lot of times it's a very difficult thing to change, to get more time. And you may look at things like when you have country property, you may not be able to get a survey for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So you need to maybe extend that part of the buyer's investigation. Say, you know what, I'll do everything else in 17 days, but I need 21 days for the survey, right? For example, right? So let's talk about the next section. If I didn't wear you out enough with the water and septic, now we're at the environmental hazards. The asbestos, lead-based paints, lead contamination, radon, methane, and other gases. Now, again, this is a mouthful, and mostly you should get disclosures on asbestos or lead-based paint, because a lot of those in recent construction are not an issue anymore. Now, the radon, the methane, and other gases, again, if you need to look at your own physical needs. Obviously, no one wants any of this stuff, but if you have some sort of respiratory impact or illness, you probably want to get, an air and mold inspection in the house. And while they're at it, they can also look for this radon or methane or other gases, carbon monoxide levels, whatever, right? Fuel oil or chemical storage tanks, those will usually show up on the NHD. Again, there might be some on storage of above ground fuel oil or chemical storage tanks that would be disclosed to you. Contaminated soil or water, again, that could be partially from your well test. In general, it's not, the contamination could show up, but there's ways to work around that. And in general, you just need to be aware of it. Now you have this hazardous waste disposal sites, electromagnetic fields, and nuclear sources. That's usually on the higher level natural hazards disclosure report. And then you have this catch-all again, other conditions including mold, airborne, toxic, or otherwise, fungus, or similar contaminants, right? So here we go, right? More stuff, right? And it's overwhelming. I know it is. But you have to look at your own situation. You may want to have an air and mold test if you have people that have a health issue that impact it. In other words, that should be something, even if it's disclosed it's not an issue, I would think you would want to check out, the air for contamination. The other thing is you would want another set of eyes on your heating and air system, because you may have some HEPA filter requirements, above the standard air filtration needed for your house. And again, you want to get that amount. It's not just inspecting the house for its as-built conditions. It's about the things that you would be the expenses and costs that you may have to make the house yours if you have some specific needs or desires, whether it's a kitchen remodel or not. There's nothing to prevent you from bringing a contractor in during your buyer investigation time and say, hey, how much is it going to cost me to do the remodel, right? But we're just going over the stuff right now that you need to do, looking at the current house with its current configuration, with its systems and how it's currently working, right? So let's hop back into it. Back on the screen share. Now we're at the earthquakes and flooding, and in general, that will be part of the TDS or the SBQ, and also there should be some verification in the natural hazard disclosure report and the susceptibility of the property to earthquake and seismic hazards and the propensity of the property to flood. That's something also when you go to call up in the next section here, the fire hazard and other insurance. That's something that you need to ask your insurance agent about is the availability of those coverage and as well as the cost of those coverage, because you may want to opt into it later. The last thing you want to figure out is that, that flood insurance that you wanted, even though the house wasn't in a 100-year flood zone, is now it's unaffordable. It's too much money, right? So fire hazard and other insurance availability and cost of necessary and desired insurance. You can't use the current policy that the current owner has, so you have to get your own policy. And the state of California, as everyone knows, insurance is quite the nightmare, especially with the fact that the state literally is a barbecue every summer, right? So here we are. You need to go make sure you look at that. And then you need to also, again, through some of the public and the private information out there, you need to look at the location of the property in regards to seismic, flood, and fire hazard. Again, in the TDS, it should be disclosed whether it's a high or very high fire severity risk. And then one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that the age of the property is going to impact the cost of the insurance. And this is the real important part. The claim history of the property and buyer are significant. I hate to possibly share this with you, and again, using the disclaimer, but people that have had prior claims with insurance companies related to casualty losses or property damage from a house that they lost, they not only decide to insure the house, but they also decide to insure the owner. And if you're one of these people that they think don't take care of your house, you may not get insurance because it's not a guarantee that your house is insurable, right? So this is really important. One of the things you can do as soon as the house gets in contract is you can call your insurance agent and determine the insurability of the property. And I recommend that, very much as fast as possible. Now let's get into another section of this contract or inspection investigation, which is really problematic, and that is building permits, zoning, and governmental requirements. You'll notice in the TDS and SBQ that a lot of times the sellers will disclose what they know, and they may have bought a house that already had a remodeled kitchen, but they don't know whether it's permitted or not permitted, and they didn't bother looking. And so again, a lot of these, your expectation that they're going to tell you everything's permitted or they have all the permits or they understand all the permits, that is most likely not going to be a happy moment for you when they tell you they're not essentially, it's on you to go up and go to the county or the local, the city office and go to the building and the planning department and do the investigation of the permit history of the property and make sure all the permits that you think that should have been done are done. And then the other piece of this thing, which is, again, a huge catch-all, is this other governmental limitations, restrictions, and requirements affecting the current or future use of the property, its development or size. One of the things that you need to be aware of when you buy these properties and say you're near a busy road, is that road going to be expanded? Is there going to be more development along that road? Traffic is a huge issue. Well, those types of investigations you're going to have to totally do on your own. And you can do that by going up to the county and just asking some question. Is there any pending zoning changes? Is there any development that's happening in the area that you can share with me, right? Another, so again, not to minimize this whole thing, this building permits, zoning, and governmental requirements. It's really a big part that is not investigated, in my opinion, as thoroughly or as complete as it needs to be. Future zoning, future use, what's happening in the area, that's all really critical to have a good feeling about before you complete the purchase of the property. Now, another thing which may not seem important, but I think it is important, and that is the rental property restrictions, and to understand that those are well beyond more than what you may see in the CCNRs. And if it's in an HOA, you're looking at what some of the use restrictions are, or what some of the allowable uses are. Is the type of rentals allowed, short-term occupancy, month-to-month, or lease. A lot of developments will not allow Airbnbs or short-term occupancy. Okay, it has to be a lease, and a lease means it's got to be over a year typically, and essentially a month-to-month doesn't require a lease. So you have to really know what the conditions are for the type of rentals allowed, and then you also need to understand the rental restrictions, which could be the rent control, the maximum number of occupants, the right of the landlord to terminate a tenancy. Tenants in California have a lot of rights, and so if you want to see how much rights they have, buy a home that is occupied by a tenant and hasn't moved out before 5 days before the close of escrow, and you will have what is known as the worst day in real estate, because evicting a tenant or is a very challenging process in California. So we're getting down to the security and safety. Again, some of this is going to be done by the general property inspection, like the installation of barriers, access alarms, self-latching mechanisms, and other safety members of existing swimming pools and spa. That's usually the big surprise, is that not all the proper protective barriers around a pool, including door alarms and whatnot, and those are important. You really want those things installed or working, or to have the option to determine that stuff. The next part is the fire safety and other measures concerning the features of the property. That again is going to be that document about whether you have a high or very high fire severity area for where the house is located. And then, but the home inspector, based on the year and age of the home, there may be mandatory sprinklers, and he's going to test those, right? And so, again, those may be part of your criteria for buying a home, is you want a home with sprinklers. Well, that's definitely going to put you, in the newer home classification, at least 2014 or newer. I think a lot of that was the mandate for all new construction in this area for fire sprinklers. Don't hold it to me, but you're really going to be looking at newer construction. And then we get into the last part, which again is a pretty big catch-all of neighborhood area, subdivision conditional, and personal factors, right? Neighborhood area and conditions, those are like schools, law enforcement, crime statistic, registered felons or offenders, fire protection, and other governmental services. Those are all need to be determined by a buyer. These don't normally show up. A lot of them, they may be a mention in the TDS or the SPQ, and I shouldn't say a mention. It may be disclosed in the TDS and the SPQ, but it may not be to your satisfaction, and you definitely need to go to the city hall or do your own research to find out what those issues are with the neighborhood and area conditions, right? The availability and adequacy and cost of internet connections and other technology services and installations. This, again, you need to really understand the world of connectivity. It's real. It's really a hard yes. You need it. It's a deal breaker. If you don't have internet, your phone doesn't work, you've got problems, right? So you need to make sure you can make phone calls and you have service when you're walking around that house, okay? You need to find out and have these people provide you an internet test speed of a device. When, have your agent request it, or you should send it over in a disclosure. The guy says he has a 1 gig download, make him prove it to you, right? If he's saying I'm streaming 3 Apple TVs at the same time, you know what? Make sure when you're in a home inspection that you got all the Apple TVs turned on and you're streaming 3 different, views, right? So internet is super important, right? And then, commercial, industrial, and agricultural activities, it will show up a lot of times in the natural hazard disclosure report. Again, this is another catch-all: existing and proposed transportation construction, development that may affect noise, view, or traffic, airport noise, or odor from any other source. That could be part of the natural hazard disclosure. It could also be partly disclosed through the TDS and the SPQ. And again, you may want to find out for your own about, talking to the local business and planning about any of this proposed transportation and construction. Nothing more happy than buying your house and then finding out the guy's going to be building a brand new construction for the next 2 years next door, right? And now another thing here is the wild and domestic animals, other nuisances, hazard and circumstances, protected species, wetland properties, and botanical diseases. Again, that's something if you're thinking of doing any building, that's a question that you need to have. I know Sacramento County has some things with the red-tailed hawk, and if they're nesting, you can't do any construction. But that's the type of stuff that's out there. So you need to ask those questions, especially if you have some work that you're planning on doing afterwards, right? And then, of course, you got the historic or other governmental sites improvements, which could be cemeteries or facilities. And the facilities could be schools. They could be water treatment plants. They could be a host of things. They could be municipal dumps. So you need to also verify those. So again, I've chatted quite a bit about this. I'm up to almost an hour talking about buyer's investigations. And, I may have went into a rabbit hole once or twice, but literally, you need to have a plan for buyer's investigations. And I'm going to make this checklist available, with a link in the video description so that people can get this checklist. But it's important to do these buyer's investigations and not to just, nonchalantly not get the information or not process it or not work through it and understand exactly what the financial and value implications are should this develop into a bigger problem or what the current size of the problem is. So again, I want to thank you today for joining me for the buyer's investigation part of the video. I think it's a very important area, more important than all the other things, the hoops you're going to be jumping through in regards to getting the financing put together if you're buying with a loan. But it's something that you really need to be willing to do, and you need to make sure your agent is going to work with you closely. And if you do have an issue, that you're somehow going to figure out how to buy time and get some extension of time addendums for certain aspects of your inspections. But I think communication is really important. And when you write an offer, you need to let people know that, hey, I'm not going to accept an old pest report. I'm not going to accept an old septic report. I'm not going to accept an old water report, because these are issues that if there's an issue, I'm out a significant amount of time and money, right? So again, thank you for your time. If I can help you, reach out to me at stanwickre.com. As you know, I'm on Facebook at Cliff Stanwick Real Estate. I also have a YouTube channel, Cliff Stanwick Real Estate. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe if you found these things valuable. I would love a like. I do like savage comments. I'm not that I'm getting many, but that's what I'm trying to do. I'm deconstructing the value of a real estate agent. I'm trying to share with you that, yeah, we have some value. These inspections are pretty comprehensive in scope, and you need somebody to help you project management all these inspections and get you in the right state of mind should there be a problem that is major or there's a minor problem, if it's time, if it's money, if it's both. So with that, I want to wish you all the best in your hunt for home. And if I can help you, please reach out. Have a great day.